I'm going to begin with a question. How many of you feel like something very unique is happening in our world right now? That this is a very, very different time. You're not alone in feeling that something very unique is happening now. In the year 2005, there was a conference, the first of its kind, that was put together pulling scientists, engineers, spiritual leaders, social architects from all over the world together for a period of time, because there is a sense as we travel, and there is a sense that something very unique is happening right now, and they wanted to know what it is. So they pulled these people together, and the outcome of this conference was so powerful that the magazine, the journal, Scientific American, issued a special issue just to encapsulate what happened at this conference and to catch the rest of the world up on what it was that would happen in this conference. It was called Crossroads for Planet Earth. Maybe some of you got the opportunity to see this. It was published in 2005. And of the many things that they talked about, what they said is, quote, that the human race is at this unique turning point, and the question, will we choose to create the best of all possible worlds? And one of the things they began looking at is not just any one single problem, but the magnitude of many problems that are facing us right now. They identified 5 different scenarios, ranging from global war to global disease to abrupt climate change. Any one of the 5 scenarios could forever end civilization and possibly life as we know it on our planet. Any one of the 5 scenarios could do that. And what makes this such a unique period in time is that all 5 are happening right now. We're living all 5 of these scenarios. And what they said, Professor E.O. Wilson of Harvard University made this statement. He said that we're approaching this time that he is calling the bottleneck in human and earth history. The bottleneck in time, he said, when our resources and our ability to solve our problems are going to be pushed to the limits. Do you feel like maybe that's happening right now? Do you sense that? It's happening on a global level, but it's also happening on a personal level. How many of you in here right now are facing some of the greatest challenges that you've ever faced in your life? So it's not just you, and it's not just a silly feeling that we're having. There is something happening now. And change the way we think of ourselves and the way we think of our world and the way we think of our relationship to one another and that world. That's where the good stuff starts to happen. And this is what they said. They said, we've got a lot of reasons to be frightened. We're being conditioned. Have you noticed how we're being conditioned to fear through the media in this country? It's not like this when you leave this country. It's something that's very unique here in America, and not just North America, it's the United States where this is happening. Every morning we're being shown a lot of reasons on the 6 o'clock news in the morning or the evening to be afraid of our world. We're being told that our climate is changing very rapidly, that there are about 30 new bacterial and viral diseases out there that we have no defense against, and we're being told they're coming our way. We're being told there are a lot of very frightening people in the world, the weather, through media specials that I feel are irresponsible personally, of a very real possibility of a global war using atomic weapons. They're asking the question, do we need new nukes? Do we need to refurbish our nuclear arsenal? Didn't you think all that was over? Well, a lot of people did. But behind the scenes, there's some very, very frightening things going on that ancient spiritual and indigenous traditions have known for thousands of years. And those principles, we're going to explore them in here. The reason I'm sharing them with you, the way I'm sharing them, is I want them to be so real for you when you leave here that you feel empowered in your lives to cast that vote on whether or not we have a peaceful world for ourselves and for our children, whether or not our bodies mirror that peace as vital, healthy beings. What kind of world we're creating together. What are we going to choose? We're making the choice right now. And a lot of people think that we have no power to make this choice. It's absolutely not true. What the experts said from this conference, they said that we've got to think differently to solve the problems that we're facing, differently than we've ever thought before, to solve both our personal and our collective problems. Because when you get right down to it, they're one and the same. If we can solve the little problems in our world, that becomes our collective answer to the problems in our lives, and vice versa. This is the way it works. Where we find ourselves today is that much of the way we have lived our lives, the way we have built our civilization, what we believe to be true about our world. A lot of good things happening, but where the problems are coming from is two false assumptions that science made in the 20th century that are carrying over right now. The first of those, scientists believe that about 96% of the universe is empty. They said only about 4% of the universe contains atoms and physical matter. The other 96% is empty. And you've all heard about dark matter, and they're suspecting that there's something else out there. But historically, for the last 100 years or so, the belief has been that it's empty space, the space between you and me, that there's nothing here. And when you look at an atom and you see that nucleus and the first electron, and the space between those two things is empty. And the second false assumption is that the inner experiences of thought, feeling, emotion, and belief have no effect on our outer world. I'm going to tell you right now, they're both false. Absolutely false. And you're going to see, how many of you already know this? How many of you know that your thoughts, feelings, emotions, and beliefs have a powerful effect in your world? How many of you would like to believe it but need a reason to really believe that, to hang on to that belief? Some people need that. Some people need that. What we're going to see is the new discoveries are showing us that there is a field of energy that fills the empty space, so the space that was believed to be empty in the universe. It's called an intelligent field of energy, intelligent because it responds to various requests and commands that come from us. It recognizes a language that you and I were born with. It's a language of human emotion based in our hearts. It's not about what we think. It's about what we feel. And that is a subtle and powerful difference. And that's what this work is all about. The new discoveries are showing that there's an intelligent field of energy that fills the space in the universe, that our bodies and our world materialize from this field. Now, this is a powerful realization. It's not that this field of energy is out there somewhere. It's here. Every atom of every cell of your body is constantly emerging and re-emerging from this field right now. You're being reborn, recreated, even before you become a cell. Below the cellular level, the stuff the cells are made of is emerging from this field. And if we understand the language that speaks to this field, it changes everything about the way we live our lives. Emotion and belief are the language that translate what's possible in that field into the reality of our world. This is a powerful, powerful statement. What our own scientists now are suggesting, there's a field of energy that's the blueprint. It's the template in which all things already exist. Everything you could ever imagine already exists as a possibility in this field. Your healing exists in this field. You're already healed. Maybe that's what the ancients meant when they said you're already healed. Peace already exists. There's a place where the diseases don't happen, where we've outgrown the habit of solving our problems through war. All of those possibilities exist in the field. Our job is to reach into that possibility and claim it, to lock that possibility into place, to breathe life into it, into the physical reality of our world. Our own science now is beginning to understand how this happens, and interestingly enough, it parallels what we've been told in other spiritual and indigenous traditions for over 5,000 years. So what I'd like to do is share some of this with you, how we know that this works. How much power do we really have to change our world, to change our lives, to change our bodies? Well, I'll answer the question right now. We have all of the power we need for all the change that we choose. The question that comes in our modern world of science is about our role in the universe. Are we simply observers in this universe, or are we more? When I was in school, and when many of you were in school, and if your kids are in school right now, there are two schools of thought about who we are in this universe. One says that the universe began a long time ago without us. And we've come along relatively recently. We're latecomers, that we will have very little effect on our world, that we're insignificant specks of dust, and after we're gone, the universe will never even know we're here. That's kind of might be an exaggeration, but not too far, because that's kind of what we're told. And there's another school of thought that says just the opposite, that says that we are powerful, powerful creators. that the universe may have begun a long time ago without us, and we've come along relatively recently. And since we're here, that we have an ability, we're only beginning to understand that we are powerful creators. And this is the great secret of many of the ancient religious and spiritual traditions. So, which is it? Are we passive observers or are we powerful creators? Which do you think? Are we passive observers? Yes or no? Are we powerful creators? Well, we're actually both. We are passive observers. We are powerful creators. It is determined by the way we see ourselves in the universe and the degree to which we claim the power that's invested in this body. We may be passive observers and have very little effect in our world, or we can be very, very powerful creators. And the key, right out of an ancient Buddhist sutra, it literally says that our reality, our bodies, our physical reality, our success, our health, our relationships, our abundance, all of those things exist only where we create the focus. But it's more than a mental process. It's much more than simply thinking about the focus. This is the stuff that just made Einstein crazy. He struggled with this until the end of his life. Albert Einstein was of the belief that we have very little power in our world. What he said, this is a quote. He said, "We live in a world which exists independently of us human beings, which stands before us like a great eternal riddle, at least partially accessible to our inspection and thinking." Now, at the same time, this is so interesting to me. At the same time, there was another man, a colleague of Albert Einstein's. They studied the same text. They worked at Princeton University together. They had the same data, the same information, and they came up with vastly different conclusions. His name was John Wheeler. Look at what John Wheeler says. By the way, John Wheeler is still alive today. And he, I believe, is still working at Princeton University. But look at what Wheeler says. Wheeler says that we couldn't even imagine a universe that did not contain us. Because, he said, it's the act of us interacting with the universe that creates the universe. He says that we live in a universe that's not finished yet. It's a work in progress. That we're tiny patches of the universe looking at itself and building itself in what he called, and I love this term, he called us a participatory universe. It's not about control. It's not about manipulation. It's not about us imposing our will upon the world around us. We share in the unfolding of our reality. Don't you like that word, participatory? Isn't that a beautiful word? Okay, does that mean anything to you at all if I say that? All right, then let's take this a little deeper. I'm going to ask a question and then I'm going to walk down there. How many of you, I want you to be honest, how many of you lie awake in bed at night, restlessly tossing and turning, sleepless, asking yourself the question, how come we never found the smallest particle of matter? Sleepless, restless, tossing and turning, asking yourself the question, how come we never found the edge of the universe? You ever wonder about that? There you are. All right, two of us. Now think about this. We've spent billions of dollars. We build these machines, these particle colliders, and we take two pieces of matter, we smash them together, creating a bajillion smaller pieces, and scientists believe that somewhere in those bajillion smaller pieces they're going to find the ultimate particle of matter. Every time they think they find it, what happens? They look a little bit closer, and what do they see? There's another particle of matter. Every time, we've got the Hubble telescope out there. It's looking at the edge of the universe. We spend a lot of money to put it up there and maintain it. It's fixed its gaze on what it believes is the edge of the universe. Every time it looks out there, scientists say, all right, I think we found the edge of the universe. And they look a little closer, and what happens? Something else there. We may never find the edge of the universe. We may never find the smallest particle of matter. And John Wheeler is telling us why. Because what he's saying is this, is that consciousness itself and being conscious is an act of creation. And that every time consciousness looks somewhere to see what exists, it will put something there for itself to see. Consciousness is creating. The expectation that you and I have while we're looking into our world. If we're going to examine our bodies, examine our world, why not look with the expectation of what it is that we'd like to see there. And that is what brings us precisely to the place. Modern science has only arrived at the place where ancient spiritual and indigenous traditions began. And that is with this understanding that this sea of energy exists. Modern science has only acknowledged the existence of this field within the last 8 to 10 years. Ancient traditions began with the understanding the field is there. Science is only about 300 years old. It's taken science 300 years to get to the place where they agree this field is there. The ancient spiritual traditions are 5, 6, 7,000 years old, and they began with that understanding. And for those 5, 6, or 7,000 years, rather than putting their effort into explaining how the field could be there, they have told us how to use it in our lives. I was trained as a scientist. And what I began asking myself is, science is good. It's a language. It's a way of knowing, but it's not the only way of knowing. So what happens now that we're faced with the greatest challenges of recorded human history? What if we take our two great ways of knowing? What if we take the spiritual traditions of our past and marry them with a very good science of our time into a greater wisdom? Do you think that sounds like a reasonable way to go? Why not? What have we got to lose? Well, this is the great secret of our past. It's called the great secret that everyone knows except us. And when I say us, it's the Judeo-Christian traditions of the last 1,700 years. The great secret is that this field is out there and that we are interacting with it every moment of every day, and that we're born with a language to use this field to heal our bodies, create peace in our world. It's the great secret that we find in some of the most remote places remaining on the earth today, in their written records. It's in the ancient libraries. It's in the mandalas. It's in the art. It's in the tapestries. It's part of their lives. It's in their culture. And for me, this is the value of going into some of these most remote, isolated, pristine places remaining on the earth today, to see what they knew or what they know now that we may have forgotten, and how that affects our lives today. Well, I was working as an engineer during the last years of the Cold War. During the first opportunity I had to visit the highlands of central China and Tibet. Now, this isn't the only place where this information remains today. But in my way of thinking, I said, if there is a wisdom that's been lost, and if we can find a tradition that's been least disturbed by Western civilization, to me that sounds like the place where that information might be most intact. Doesn't that make sense? So Tibet was a perfect candidate because it was so isolated for so long. Well, it was in 1998 we had the opportunity to share a 22-day pilgrimage that included 12 monasteries and 2 nunneries. And this is one of the monasteries. Now, some of you have seen these images before, and some have never seen them. And I've put some things in that I think no one has seen before. But we had the formalities of being welcomed and greeted and all the festivities that went. The first thing they said to us when we showed up there was, "What are you guys doing here?" They said it through the translator. Because they don't see a lot of Westerners there. As to whether or not they had records, a library, a hidden library that we could see, and if there was an abbot in this monastery that we could actually meet with face to face and ask questions. He said, yes, but I've got to go get the keys. And he's got the keys. See those keys in his hand right there? Time means absolutely nothing in Tibet. So this little monk, when I asked the question, can we get into this library and can we speak with his abbot? He said, sure, through the translator. He said, sure, I've got to go get the keys. Wait right here. Because time means nothing in Tibet, he thought nothing of jumping on his bicycle, and he rode 30 miles in one direction to get these keys and 30 miles back while we were waiting right there. And it was worth the wait, because we went in. The first thing he did is he took us past the library, and then he took us in to meet the abbot. To get to the library, we went through these beautiful hallways of prayer wheels into a perfectly dark room that looked like this. And it was in this room that we saw the first library. This library is 3 stories tall, but it's only 12 feet wide. So it's a tall, narrow room. And when the lights came on, this is what we were looking at. And I'm looking up at the corner of this library. This particular library has been here, this monastery has been here 1,500 years. And it was in this library we began to find the texts that led us to a meeting with this man. So this is he's now in his mid-80s. We went through our formalities of the greeting, and then they allowed me, through the translator, to sit to the side and ask him questions. And I asked him the same question I asked every monk, every nun, every opportunity I had. So I'm asking this abbot this question, and here's my question. I said, in your tradition, what is the force that connects everything in the universe? And the translator and the abbot had this banter back and forth, longer than it should have taken just to answer the question. And then he looked at me with one word, he answered the question. And I thought I heard it wrong. And so he asked me again, and he answered with exactly the same question. Exactly the same question. I said, what is the force that connects everything in the universe? He said, it's compassion. And I said, well, wait a minute. This is powerful. This is very subtle, but it's very powerful. Now think about this. I said, wait a minute. Are you telling me that compassion is a feeling that we have in our bodies, or is it a force in the universe that holds everything together? Which is it? And the translator turned to him, and they had their banter back and forth. And he looked at me and answered again with one word. I said, is compassion a feeling in our bodies, or is it a force in the universe? And he said, yes. Think how powerful that is. This man is telling us that you and I have the ability to create an experience inside of our bodies, in our hearts specifically, and we'll get into this. In our hearts, we can create an experience that aligns us, tunes us with the force that holds everything together in the universe. And this is the essence of a teaching that they've shared for over 2,000 years in this part of the world. But it sounds very foreign to our way of thinking. In 1944, the man that many believe to be the father of quantum theory, his name was Max Planck, made a statement. And it's a very, very powerful statement. It's going to sound contemporary today. Remember, it was made in 1944. Look at what Max Planck said. He said, as a man who has devoted his whole life to the most clear-headed science, to the study of matter, I can tell you as a result of my research about the atoms this much. He said, there is no matter as such. He said, the stuff that we think everything is made of doesn't even exist the way we think that it exists. He went on to say that what we see as matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force. He said there's something out there that underlies what we see as matter. We must assume behind this force the existence of a conscious and intelligent mind. This mind, he said, is the matrix of all matter. The matrix of all matter. And this is where you saw the movie series, The Matrix. It was based on the work from Max Planck. Back in the early part of the 20th century, the idea that there is another reality, there's something that underlies everything that we see. We can't see it, but it's there. It's where everything begins. It's where the blueprint or the template of all reality begins. And this is what he's saying. Now we say that the Tibetans and many other traditions are saying precisely the same thing. The scientists believe that 96% of our universe is made of empty space. How many of you have heard that before? You heard that things between here and there are empty. Well, where this comes from, there was a great controversy about whether or not there's an essence that holds everything together. It was raging in the mid-1800s, late 1800s. And it was in 1887, a very famous experiment was done that was designed once and for all to end that controversy. It was called the Michelson-Morley experiment. Maybe you've heard about it. You've probably heard about it if you've been to any of my programs in the past. The idea was this. Michelson-Morley, British physicist Michelson and Morley, built a device. They said, if this field is out there, it should be moving, and because it should be moving, we should be able to measure it. They did an experiment in 1887. In my opinion, it was a good experiment. It was poorly interpreted. Let me just give you the equivalent. If we were all to go out into the parking lot here, and if we moistened our finger and held it above our heads, and in the moment we did that, if we felt no wind against our fingers, and because there was no wind blowing against our finger, we concluded that no air exists around us. Is that true? No. Just because the wind isn't moving doesn't mean the air doesn't exist. But that's the equivalent of this very famous experiment. They said if this field is out there, it should be moving. They tried to measure it. They found nothing moving. And because nothing was moving, they said the field doesn't exist. From 1887 until about 3 years ago, all of our science, the best science of our time, has been based in the understanding and the belief that everything's separate from everything else. That what happens in one place has no effect on what's happening somewhere else. That nothing is connected. And if it looks like it's connected, it's just a coincidence. It's not really there. What's interesting was in 1986, that same experiment was performed again by the United States Air Force. It was published, the results were published in the very prestigious journal Nature. And guess what? They found the field was there. It should have made the cover of Time Magazine, USA Today, and CNN, but nobody has heard about it because they made it so very, very technical. But now we know that field is there. It's there. Well, 1999... NASA built a very special observatory. It was called the Chandra X-ray Observatory. Its sole mission, look at the mission statement for the Chandra Observatory. Its only purpose in life was to detect invisible fields of energy in what was considered to be empty space. Isn't that a great mission statement? Well, we have some. Do you want to see what Chandra found? You want to see what's out there? Because I think it really helps. I'm a very visual person. For me, it helps to see how these things work. Well, here's what Chandra found. First of all, I'm going to begin. This is an image from the Hubble Space Telescope. And where those two arrows come together on either side here is believed to be the center of our universe, where everything began, a moment that was called the Big Bang. So that is believed to be the center of the universe. The Hubble telescope is looking at it in terms of what it can see as visible light. So if you could see far enough, you could see this with the naked eye. See how the stars and galaxies more or less appear separate from one another. Can you kind of see that? Everybody see that? See how there's empty space in there, empty space in there, and there. Okay, now the next image is looking at precisely the same place, the center of the universe, through the eyes of the Chandra Observatory at the invisible fields that the naked eye can't see. What looks like it's empty space would have stuff in there as well. In other words, if you put everything together, it would look like a solid mass of energy out there. But what's interesting, we talk about this matrix. This looks more like a web of energy. This doesn't look like the little squares on a piece of graph paper. What my left brain, man brain, would think about in terms of a grid or a matrix. And I think that's interesting because our most cherished and spiritual traditions have always told us there's a web of energy. In the Buddhist traditions, the great god Indra spun the web of creation. Or in this part of the world, Spider Grandmother in the Hopi traditions. The first thing she did when she emerged into our world was to build the web upon which all life would exist. And we're looking at what may be that web. So you can see that empty space is anything but empty. Now, the field that is out there and the field that has now been discovered, this field of energy, it's so new that scientists have yet to agree upon a single term. They're calling it many different things. You'll see in some texts they're calling it a very technical term, the quantum hologram. Some are simply calling it the field. If you've read Lynn McTaggart's book, The Field, I'll be presenting in Germany with her in just a few months. Some are calling it the mind of God. Stephen Hawking calls it the mind of God. Former Apollo astronaut Ed Mitchell calls it nature's mind. Max Planck called it the matrix. We're calling it now the divine matrix. They're all different names for that same field of energy. The key is it's there. There's a field of energy that holds everything together, but it does more than just connect, and that's why we're here today. It does more than simply connect everything together. This field of energy is believed to be the container for the entire universe. It's the container within which all things must occur. That means that whatever happens in this world, light or dark, good or bad, we're part of what's happening, and that means that we can create change in what's happening. There is no them and us, as you're going to see in just a moment. There is we. If we know the language this field recognizes, that's where the miracles begin. The divine matrix, it's the container that holds everything together. It's the bridge between your inner and your outer world. If you ever wonder how a prayer in your living room could possibly help your loved ones in the battlefield of Iraq halfway around the world, this field is the answer. When we understand how it works. It doesn't work the way conventional energy works. And it is a mirror. This field mirrors back to us what it is that we give it to work with through the language of belief, feeling, emotion, and thought. Very precise ways of using these. Does that make sense so far? You okay with that? It's a container, it's a bridge, and it's a mirror. I'd like to explore each of these individually, and then I want to share some real-time examples. I've got a container for the universe. NASA built another probe that was called the COBE. Wouldn't you like to be the guy that sits around in a room thinking up the acronyms for these projects? The COBE mission is the acronym for the Cosmic Background Explorer. What does that mean? It means that this particular probe was designed to measure the energy from the beginning of the universe. Something happened. Scientists are still not certain precisely what it was, but they're all pretty much in agreement that a long time ago, far, far away, our universe looked about like that. Just a few moments after this massive release of energy called the Big Bang began, what they say is that the entire universe, if you could reach out to the edges of the universe right now and take all the particles of matter and pull them back together and take out all the space between, all that matter would fit into this tiny ball compressed into something about the size of a single green pea. That's how big the universe was. Now, I've talked to somebody, I thought I could get by without doing this, but I can't because I just have to. I've talked to some of the people modeling this, and what they say on the computers, they say the computers tell us that the temperature, everything was compressed so tightly, so it was very, very warm. They say it was about 18 billion, million degrees Fahrenheit. And I said, come on, you guys, how do you know that? And they said, okay, we don't, but it was hot. So it was a very hot, tiny hot universe at that time. But here's the key. Immediately after this happened, it began to expand. And as the universe expanded, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration was born. No, as the universe expanded, and it continues to expand today, as it expanded, it carried more than heat and light. It carried this field of energy that's still there today, that's holding everything together. Well, what these traditions are saying is what our own science is now beginning to understand, is that this field of energy is the container. Everything that's happening, and this is why it's so important, everything that's possible that could ever happen, it's going to happen in this field of energy. It's all happening in that field. There's nothing outside of that field. So the divine matrix is the container for this field of energy. Can you see how it's the container? Does that make sense to you? All right with that? It is the bridge between our inner and our outer worlds. And I'm going to share two experiments here that tell us how this bridge works. Some of you may have seen these in the past, some have not. Even if you have, we're going to apply them differently, and I wanted to show them to you again today. Because they're so powerful in helping us to understand our relationship to our world. First experiment. This is the one very famous in our programs. We've shared this in many programs over the years. The Russian physicist Vladimir Poponin. When he designed this experiment, I think the experiment is fascinating, but what's really so interesting to me is the thinking underlying this experiment. Because when scientists begin asking the kinds of questions that these men are asking, you know we're on the verge of a big shift in the way we see our world. This is what he did. Vladimir Paponian, he took a tube of glass, sealed both ends, and he took all the air out from inside that tube, creating what is called a vacuum, implying that that tube is empty. But we know it's not really empty, so already there's a problem. Because we know inside that tube, there's still something in there. There are little particles of light that atoms are made of, called photons. Photons are little pieces of light that make the atoms, that make everything in our world what it is. And they know that there are photons in this tube. What they don't know is where they are. They don't know if they're all piled up at the bottom, if they're all sticking to the sides, if they're hovering in the air. They don't know where these things are. So they measured these, and there was no surprise. The first part of this experiment, there's no surprise. Here's what they found. They measured where are the photons, and the photons are everywhere, even that one. They're absolutely random, and this is precisely what they expected to happen. So there's no surprise here. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. They took living human DNA and put it into the tube with the photons. And they said, what is the effect? Well, why would there be any effect? Because you and I were conditioned to believe that there's nothing in the space between here and there. So why would the DNA have any effect on those photons? There's nothing to connect the two, right? That's what we're told. There's nothing there. Well, here's what happened. They put the DNA into the tube, and look at what the photons did. I was at a program not long ago, and it happened so fast that people were taking notes or they had blanked and they missed it. So they said, give us a heads up, so here's the heads up. Okay, so here it comes. Here comes the connection. Look at what happens. The DNA is now in the tube with the photons. If that sounds too technical, think of it this way. The stuff we're made of is in the tube with the stuff our world is made of. And they're asking the question, what effect does the stuff we're made of have on the stuff our world is made of? We've been told that we have no effect on the world. Look at what happens. All of a sudden, in the presence of the DNA, the stuff our world is made of is no longer random. It's not just everywhere. It actually aligned itself with the DNA. The DNA is having a direct effect on the physical stuff of our world. There's nothing, absolutely nothing in conventional Western physics that allows for this to happen, and it happens every time. This is the first time under laboratory conditions that this experiment has been documented like this. It's very controversial, but the bottom line is that the DNA is having a direct effect on the stuff that atoms are made of. That's important. Does that make sense so far? Are you okay with that? That's important. I like this. This is right out of the lab notes that were published in the journal. Look at what the researchers say about this. There's not much neutrality going on here. Sometimes researchers say, let me show you what we found, or we'd like to share with you the results of our research. But look at what this says. It says, we are forced to accept the possibility that some new field of energy is being excited by the DNA. Well, it's probably not a new field at all. It's a field that's been there for a long time. They're only beginning to understand what that field means. Some new field of energy. So, experiment number 1, what just happened? The DNA directly affects the stuff our world is made of. That's important. Okay, here's the second experiment. The human matrix interface. How do we talk to this field? This is a paper that's released 1993. Local and non-local effects of coherent heart frequencies on conformational changes of DNA. I know what they're saying, and it's a good paper and it's accurate, but it sounds very complex. The scientists are asking a question, what effect does emotion have on the shape of DNA? What effect does emotion have on the shape? When I was in school, I believed that DNA pretty much looked the same for everybody. Isn't that kind of what you thought when you were in school? The average person has about 50 trillion cells in your body. Within each of our cells, there's a strand of DNA. I always thought it looked the same, but it doesn't. And what the researchers have found is that sometimes the DNA is wound up really tight, just like a little knot. And sometimes that DNA is really loose and relaxed. The looser the DNA is, the more relaxed it is, the greater its expression. That means that you and I have a stronger immune response, that we don't age the same way, that we're healthier when our DNA is relaxed. When it's wound up tight like a little knot, it shuts down the capability of the DNA, and we don't have that full expression. And they're asking, what emotions create what effects? Well, intuitively, you probably already know this, don't you? You probably already know. What kind of emotions would you think would enhance your immune response? What kind of emotions would allow all of your hormones to produce their full component? Okay, what we would call positive emotions, absolutely. And what do you think negative emotions would do? Contract the DNA and shut those things down. Well, this is exactly what the researchers found. Look at this. What they found is that around every human heart, there's a field of energy that looks like this. It's called a torus. It looks like a little donut between 5 and 8 feet around every human heart. And I asked the researchers, I said, if this field's so powerful, why would it stop at 8 feet? And they said, well, that's the limitation of our equipment. They said, in reality, this field has been documented to exist. Listen to this. The field has been documented to exist many miles beyond the place where the physical heart resides. That means every one, there's 600 or so people in this room, every one of you, if you're within 5 to 8 feet of another human, you're sharing a heart field. But even if you're not, there's a good chance that the heart field in this room is extending well into the streets of Scottsdale right now. What are we going to do with that field? Well, here's what the research showed. Here's what they did. They said, what is the effect of positive emotions, gratitude, appreciation, love, compassion? This should be no surprise to you now. Do you think it's going to constrict or is it going to relax that DNA? Okay, it's going to relax it. But here's where this gets really, really very cool. The researchers let this experiment run beyond the time that they thought that they were going to be running the experiment. Here's what they found. The longer that those positive emotions were emitted from the heart, the more the DNA relaxed, and it began to relax so much. You know how we see DNA as a double helix like this? It began to relax so much that the double helix began to unwind itself and separate as if it were about to replicate, giving new life to itself. And all they were doing was having a feeling. That's all they did. That's all they did. What do you think happened in the presence of anger, frustration, jealousy, hate? Absolutely. It wound up like a little top. And this is what happens. You know this. People who are chronically... If you ever worked with... I worked when I was in the corporations. I worked with a man who was still angry at a divorce that happened 30 years earlier. He wore it to work every day. You could see it on his face. You could see it on his body. I watched him get old long before his time. And I can't attribute it 100% to his emotions about his divorce, but I think it played a significant role just because of the conversations that we would have. So to you intuitively, I know this makes sense. These are scientists now telling us about this relationship in our lives. And this is powerful. Each of these experiments is interesting. When you put them together, they tell a story. The individuals trained in feelings of love and appreciation were able to intentionally change the shape of the DNA in their bodies. All they did was have a feeling, and they could change the shape and either enhance their immune systems or shut it down, enhance their hormone production or shut it down. And all they did was have a feeling. Human emotion produces effects which defy the conventional laws of physics as we know those laws today. It means you and I can have an experience in our bodies. We're not bound by the laws of physics, at least the way we know those laws today. If you're not bound by those laws, another way of saying that is that you're free of those laws of physics, and the experiments are showing this. Okay, I know I went through this quickly because we're going somewhere with this. These are two experiments. The first one showed that DNA had a direct effect on the stuff our world is made of, right? We saw that. The second one is showing that the way we feel is having an effect on the DNA that's having an effect on the stuff that our world is made of. So the bottom line Emotion is changing the DNA. DNA changes matter. You take out the middle step and look at what it says. That you and I may create an experience inside of our bodies that produces effects that are not limited to our bodies. They can change our bodies and they can change our world. Emotions, feelings, beliefs produce heart waves of energy that change the cells of your body, that change the atoms of your world. And it's all about the quality of the feeling that we're holding in our hearts. How much power do we really have to change our world, to change our lives, to change our bodies? To answer that question, I'm going to tell you a story. It's a true story of the birth of two little girls. They were twins, premature, in a hospital in upstate New York about 3 years ago. Are there any healthcare practitioners here in the room? Any nurse practitioners? Then you're already going to know the answer to some of this. When preemies first come into this world, what do they do with those preemies? What's the first thing they do with them? They take them away from the mother, and they take them away from one another. And that is precisely what they did with these two girls. Now, can you imagine? They were in the womb. They were in their mother's womb about 7 months. Pretty cozy place. Familiar with the heartbeat of one another and with their mother's heartbeat. And all of a sudden, in just a few seconds, they come into the harsh lights of the infant ICU. They're naked. Their backs are to the world. And they're separated. They're put into separate incubators, and they're hooked up to the equipment. Can you imagine what that must be like? Would it even make any sense to them? And they were put in separate ICU wards. And they were hooked up to the monitors, and almost immediately something began to happen. One of the girls was weaker than the other. Her vitals began to fail. And she started to die. There was a nurse that was on duty that evening. And she did everything that she could by the book, and it wasn't doing any good. She said, I'm going to have to do something quick, or we're going to lose this one. She broke the protocols. She took the weaker of the two, the one whose vitals were failing. She took her out of the incubator, and she put her in with the stronger baby sister. Now, they're both lying face down in the same incubator. Their eyes are closed. But what I'm about to share with you right now, this tells the story of who we are, because what I'm about to share with you says that it couldn't be taught, because they hadn't been in this world long enough to know it. What I'm about to share is something that's instinctive. So they're both lying face down. Both of them had their eyes closed. When the stronger of the two girls sensed her weaker sister being placed next to her, she reached out with her arm, and she put her arm around the shoulder of her baby sister. And the moment she did that, her signs got stronger and stronger, and both of them got stronger and healthier, and they both survived. Okay, can you feel that feeling in your body? You feel it? Some more than others, but can you feel that feeling in your body? The reason I'm sharing this story with you, the previous slide asked the question, how much power do we have to change our bodies, to change our lives, to change our world? And this is the answer. Because that feeling is a language. It's a language that has no words, no outward expression, and that bypassed your mind. Bypassed your brain. This is coming from your heart. If I had come into this room and said, have the feeling that you're having right now, just have that feeling for no reason, would you have been able to do it? Maybe, maybe not. That feeling, that pure innocence of what it is you're feeling when you see something like that, that's the language that allows us to touch the stuff this world is made of. That's the feeling that allows us to heal our bodies, to unwind those strands of DNA like they're going to reproduce themselves, to breathe life into our bodies, to bring peace in our world. It's the same feeling. It's the very feeling that you and I were conditioned away from in the Judeo-Christian traditions, and especially if you're a man. Men, and by the way, there's a lot of men in this room, and I just want to acknowledge and give a hand to all the men in this conference. This is really good. Men, you know what I'm talking about. We've been conditioned to, first of all, not to have feelings, or if we do, don't let anyone see them. Women, you are conditioned you can have them, they just don't mean anything, and go have them by yourself somewhere. Maybe that's an exaggeration, but probably not too far off in our culture. But what's so interesting is it is not that way in other cultures. That feeling has been so honored and so trusted and so respected in so many other different traditions that it's encouraged and developed. So we talk about emotion. It's not emotion of sadness or joy, necessarily that kind of emotion. It's a deep inner experience of the acknowledgement of the connectedness that we have with one another and our world, and maybe a greater power. And it's something that has been hard to teach over the ages. It's hard to teach. It's a language that has no outward expression. There are no words. How much power do we have to change our bodies and our world? That language is the power. And that is what this is all about. The divine matrix, it's a container. It's a bridge. And I said it's also a mirror. It will mirror back to us what we expect or what we create through that feeling in our lives. How many in here do affirmations? Back in the old days when I was an engineer with Martin Marietta in Denver, back in I guess it was in the 80s, the famous brown cloud in Denver, the air was so bad we couldn't drive every day. So we had to carpool. And I remember I'd carpool with another guy in our engineering department certain days of the week, depending on what the last digit of my license plate ended with. So one day I got to his house early in the morning. He wasn't ready for work yet. And I said, "Can I use your bathroom?" And he said, "Sure." And I went in there, had little Post-it notes all over his bathroom. They weren't just on the mirror, man. They were on the walls. They were on the shower curtain, everything. My perfect mate is manifesting for me now. My perfect mate is manifesting for me now. We got into his car to go to work, and it was all over the car. He had them on the dashboard. He had hanging from the rear. He had Post-it notes hanging on other Post-it notes. Of course, I knew what his office looked like because I'd seen him. They're all over his CRT and all over the walls. My perfect mate is manifesting for me now. My perfect mate is manifesting for me now. His name was John. I said, "John, do these affirmations work for you?" He says, "Nah." I said, "Do you ever say them?" He goes, "Yeah, I say them about 1,000 times a day." And I said, "Well, why do you think they don't work?" And he said, "Well, look at me. Who'd ever want to be with somebody like me? You know, I'm a slob. I'm an engineer. And I wear the same clothes 3 out of 5 days of the week." And it was a beautiful example. To him, the affirmation was an empty word because the feeling underlying it didn't honor the affirmation. His feeling was that he wasn't worthy. I mean, that's just an example, but this is the power of the way this mirror works. It will mirror back to us what it is that we're expecting, what we're expecting to experience in our lives. Well, I have a couple of examples I wanted to share. I want to share with you the power. This is what makes these things so real. This is all nice to know. It's all academic unless we can apply it in our lives, unless we understand how this language works in our lives. It was in this particular monastery when we were in Tibet in 2005, where we had the opportunity to see these books, and they gave very precise instructions that actually parallel many of the Judeo-Christian instructions that you find in places like the Dead Sea Scrolls, echoing precisely what we're saying right now. The bottom line of all of these is that heart-based feeling, belief, compassion is a language that speaks to the universe. It's not about the words. It's about the feeling underlying those words. The key, and I'll just share the key now, and then we're going to see an example. The key is to feel the feeling as if your prayer has already answered. Not that you're going to get there as if it's already happened. As if your body is already healed. As if your perfect relationship is there or here. As if peace is already present. Let me ask, I know some of you have read some of the other books and some have never heard of some of this before. If you are offering a prayer that says, "Dear God, please let there be peace in this world," what have you just said? Can you see why that is? Please let there be healing in the body of my loved one. Even a well-intentioned prayer, you may be empowering the very condition that you'd like to change. If you're asking for it to happen, you're acknowledging it has not occurred yet. And to you, you might say, "Well, that's splitting hairs." But that subtle and powerful difference makes all the difference in the world. All the difference in the world. Anybody see the movie Ghost, Patrick Swayze? Do you remember the place where Patrick Swayze is at a train station as a ghost, and he's trying to kick a physical can. And he can't do it. And the more he tried, the more frustrated he got, and his face got wrinkled, and it turned red, and his veins were sticking out, and he couldn't do it. Remember that? And all of a sudden, another man comes by who's also a ghost, and he looked at him and he said, "It doesn't work like that here anymore. You can't do it like that." He says, "You got to feel it. You got to feel like it's already done." And that's what he did. And as soon as he began to feel that can was moving, he was kicking that can all over the place. It was that little, just that little subtle shift in perspective. That is the peace that was lost to us 1,700 years ago when our most cherished biblical texts were edited. 45 books were removed and condensed and rearranged. And we know that because we found the originals now in the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Nag Hammadi libraries. And ironically, the very books that were removed were the books that tell us, number one, that everything is connected through a field of energy. Number two, that feeling is the language. It's not the words. And when we lost those texts, we began to think that the words were the way to get things done. It's the feeling. Feel as if those things have already happened. I wanted to give you a couple of examples of where this has been applied. Scientists and some researchers understand this principle. In the early 1980s, during the first Israeli-Lebanese war, this very principle was applied. And I want to share this with you, and then I want to share an experiment that is going on right this second, and you can see it real time. In the early 1980s, researchers were trained to feel as if peace was already present, not to judge the Israelis as good, bad, right, or wrong, or the Palestinians or the Lebanese, to simply feel peace. And they were stationed throughout the war-torn areas of the Middle East. And they did this on multiple occasions, different days of the week, different hours of the day. So many times they were able to actually create a formula that says how many people are required to have this feeling before peace is mirrored in the area. It was published. It's a very famous study. It was called International Peace Project in the Middle East. It was published in the Journal of Conflict Resolution, Volume 32, Number 4. So it's on the audio if you want to look that up. What they found is this. It takes relatively few number of people to actually do this to begin to create the feeling. The number of people required was the square root of 1% of a population. And that number may not mean much. We're going to explore it here in just a minute. But it's a very, very small number. What it means is if you take a population, this is 600 people in this room, so this is a population. If we took 1% of 600 and then took the square root of that, that's how many people would be required to feel peace before we could create peace if we needed to in this room. Well, the number was very small. For a population of 1 million people, if you had a city of 1 million people, if you take 1% of 1 million, it's about 10,000 people. If you take the square root of 10,000 people, it's only about 100. That's how many people, the minimum number of people it takes to kickstart that experience. On a planet of 6 billion people, the same formula applies. If you take 1% of 6 billion, it's about 60 million. If you take the square root of that, it's just under 8,000 people. That's all it takes. Princeton University began an experiment in 1998. What they found is that certain kinds of electronics change when human consciousness changes. That the field that we're talking about is so real that when consciousness changes, it changes the electronics in the room. Anybody in here, you walk in the room and the remote already goes off on the TV when you walk in there, your stereo turns on, or you put a street light out in the parking lot at the airport? Okay, so you know what I'm talking about. So Princeton University found there are certain kinds of electronics that change in the presence of human emotion. Knowing this, they developed a series of gadgets in what became known as the Global Consciousness Project. They built 40 little devices. They planted them all over the world. All 40 devices feed back into one computer at Princeton, and it monitors consciousness from all over the world. That's how real this field is. I want you to have a sense This isn't some academic idea. This field is so real. You and I are part of it, and we can use it if we understand the language. But you have to know that these things are happening. So, beginning in 1998, they planted 40 of these devices all over the world. And they began monitoring through one computer. So here's what's happening. Here's the computer at Princeton. Here's the world. Here's 40 devices all over the world. They're all feeding back into that one computer. So now you got the idea, right? Okay, so if this technology works right, let's see. To save time, I'm going to unplug one and plug in the other. And we said we could do this. Wow, see how fast that was? Okay, this is a map of where these devices are right now. And for where you and I are right now, there's only two that are even close to us. One is in Austin, Texas, and one is in Black Forest, Colorado. So they are these two right here. Okay? Now, so what I'd like to do, each of those devices right now is sending a signal back to the Princeton computer. Everything's kind of humming along. When something commands our attention in a moment in time, something big like 9/11 or the death of Princess Diana. But the reason I share that is not just bad things. It's anything that commands our focus. When many people come together in a moment in time for focus, what you're seeing here is the larger, like right there, where something is happening with this egg right here. That's the 1, 2, 3, fourth one over. 1, 2, 3, 4. This one just popped right here. There's another one down there. The larger you see the red bar, it means something is happening right now, real time. It's about 10 seconds off. Something is happening, and there are some of these that are telling us what's happening in Pakistan. Some are telling us what's happening in New York. What is so interesting about this? Number one, the only way that this could work is if the field were connecting everything. So this tells you that field is so real that we're able to actually measure mass human consciousness on a global scale. Now, they installed this in 1998. They wanted it up for the 2000 millennium celebrations to see if it would work. The whole world was focused as the date line swept across the earth on what was happening. And it worked like a champ, and they left it up. It was up over September 11th, 2001. But here's where this gets really interesting. As you can imagine, all of the little devices were off the charts on September 11th. That's no surprise. But what surprised many researchers, and this tells the whole story, is that the graphs, the charts, the sensors began to pick up attention in consciousness almost a full day before the events of 9/11 ever happened. In other words, it was did you get to feel that? Ooh. It was in the field before it ever occurred. So they're asking the question, now that we know, if we start to see readings like that, like we saw on 9/11, and it's not the last episode of The Bachelor that's going on that day, maybe it's a heads up that something big is about to happen in our world. And maybe that's the time that presidents talk to their countries and that religious leaders talk to their congregations, that parents have dinner with their children, and we talk to our children, and all of those things ease that global tension. They ease that global consciousness. Now, the researchers that put this together, they're good scientists, and they are the first to say even they do not understand precisely how this field works. They say we can use what we do know, but we can study another 100 years and maybe not understand it precisely. But the fact that this field, that these little devices will change when consciousness changes, because the field is the conduit that's allowing that to happen. That is the reason I wanted to share this with you today. For the first time in history, we have a real-time reading of global consciousness. We can see a feedback mechanism of when we're doing the right things together and when we're not. And it doesn't take 6 billion people to do it. A relatively small number of people that understand the language of the field can create this change. The divine matrix, can you see how it's a container? Does that make sense to you? Can you see how it's a bridge and a mirror as well? It's mirroring back what it is that we give it to work with. Bridging time, space, miracles, and belief. That's what we're doing with this. We ask the question, who are we? Who are we in this field? Who are we in this world? Well, of the many things we are, we now know that we're reality makers. Reality exists only where we create our focus. We can only make what we believe. And the question is, we're at this crossroads of human history, crossroads for planet Earth. We have two very, very different scenarios on the horizon, and we have people pulling us in both directions. Which are we going to choose? I think we're making that decision right now. The choice is being made right now. It is not set in stone. I'm going to tell you right now, we are not victims of this reality. We're not victims of any predestined future. And none of the frightening things you're being shown on network media have to happen. Now is the time. We have all the time we need, and now is the time for us to make that choice. I don't know about you, I'm going for this choice. And the power to do that is a power that lives in every one of us. That's the very beginning.